The Beatles weren't just a band, they were a revolution. And in the wake of that sonic tidal wave, a new generation of artists emerged, some consciously following in their footsteps, others unknowingly shaped by their influence. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about discrediting anyone's talent. Every artist on this list carved out their own path and left their own mark. But when you trace the DNA of modern rock and pop, the fingerprints of the Fab Four are everywhere. In melodies, studio wizardry, stage presence, and even cultural impact. Let's get down to this list.
God only knows what I'd be without you. Wouldn't it be nice if we were older?
What's fascinating is how the inspiration flowed both ways. In the mid-1960s, a creative rivalry sparked between the Beach Boys and the Beatles, driving each band to new artistic heights. When Rubber Soul dropped in 1965, Brian Wilson called it the first album that felt like a complete work, not just a collection of singles. It inspired him to create Pet Sounds, a landmark in pop innovation. Fueled by the Beatles' studio experimentation and lyrical maturity, Wilson expanded the Beach Boys' sound far beyond surf pop. Songs like God Only Knows and Caroline No carried emotional depth and rich orchestration.
God only knows what I'd be without you. Oh, Caroline, you break my heart.
The Beatles noticed. Paul McCartney later said Pet Sounds directly influenced Sgt. Pepper's, and even called God Only Knows one of his favorite songs ever. Though the momentum slowed after Smile, that Beatles-inspired era remains the creative peak of the Beach Boys' legacy. Black Sabbath may seem worlds apart from the Beatles, but the influence is real, even if it's more inspirational than musical. Geezer Butler once said he was obsessed with the Beatles, and they're the reason he picked up an instrument. Tony Iommi, too, found hope in their success, especially coming from the same working-class British roots. And Ozzy? Hearing She Loves You was, in his words, a life-changing moment. They didn't sound like the Beatles, not even close. Where the Beatles were melodic and experimental, Sabbath forged something darker. The birth of heavy metal. But here's the twist. I Want You, She's So Heavy, from Abbey Road, came out just months before Sabbath's debut. That sludgy, ominous riff? Proto-metal. A blueprint. The Beatles lit the spark. Black Sabbath took it, twisted it, and forged a new genre from the fire. The Byrds were, in many ways, born from the Beatles' spark. Roger McGuinn heard A Hard Day's Night and was captivated, especially by George Harrison's jangly 12-string Rickenbacker. That sound became the Byrds' calling card. Inspired by the Beatles' success, the Byrds blended folk and rock, famously electrifying Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man in 1965. With its Beatle-like beat and poetic lyrics, it launched folk rock, and Dylan himself took notice, soon going electric. But the influence wasn't one way. George Harrison later admitted, If I Needed Someone was a nod to the Byrds' sound.
If I needed someone.
Their experiments with psychedelia and Indian music on tracks like 8 Miles High paralleled, and possibly influenced Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. For Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, seeing the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964 wasn't just inspiring, it was destiny.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. You let me hold your hand. You let me hold your hand.
Gene later said, "Before the Beatles, there was nothing. They made me want to pick up a guitar and become a star." Kiss borrowed from the Beatles' idea of a band as 4 distinct personalities: John, Paul, George, Ringo, each with a role. Kiss ran with it. The Demon, the Star Child, the Spaceman, the Catman. Where the Beatles pioneered music marketing and cultural impact, Kiss turned it into an empire, from comic books to lunchboxes. Even Kiss branded coffins. Musically, they had little in common. But in terms of ambition, image, and branding, Kiss saw the Beatles not just as artists, but as the blueprint for becoming larger than life. Badfinger weren't just influenced by the Beatles, they were practically their protégés. Signed as the first act to Apple Records, the Beatles' own label, Badfinger were mentored closely, with Paul McCartney even writing and producing their first hit, Come and Get It. Their songs, No Matter What, Day After Day, Baby Blue, carried echoes of Rubber Soul and Revolver.
No matter what you do, I will always be around. Baby blue, my lonely glue, day after day.
While they began in the Beatles' shadow, they forged their own path, helping pioneer power pop and influencing later bands like Big Star and Cheap Trick. But behind the music was tragedy. Mismanagement, financial ruin, and broken promises took a brutal toll. Both Pete Ham and Tom Evans would later die by suicide. Badfinger had the talent, the songs, and the Beatles' blessing, but not the luck.
I wait outside the pilgrim's door with insufficient.
Now, we enter the progressive rock frontier. King Crimson didn't try to sound like the Beatles, but without them, a band like King Crimson might never have had a stage. The Beatles' later albums, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, The White Album, redefined rock as serious, boundary-pushing art. That gave bands like King Crimson the green light to explore concept albums, shifting time signatures, and long experimental compositions. When In the Court of the Crimson King dropped in 1969, it felt like a direct evolution of the Beatles-era shift toward album-oriented conceptual music, only darker, wilder, and more complex. The Beatles didn't just inspire ELO, they created the spark for it. Jeff Lynne, the visionary behind Electric Light Orchestra, once said his mission was to pick up where I Am the Walrus left off. And if you listen closely, it shows. From the start, ELO fused rock and orchestral elements, echoing the Beatles' experiments on tracks like Eleanor Rigby and Strawberry Fields Forever. Where the Beatles dabbled in strings, Illo made them a signature. And here's the twist. Lynn didn't just admire the Beatles, he joined their orbit. He produced for George Harrison, co-founded the Traveling Wilburys, and helped complete Free as a Bird in the 90s with the surviving Beatles. Illo carries Beatles' DNA in sound, spirit, and fearless creativity. A living tribute wrapped in symphonic rock. Kurt Cobain was a devoted fan, especially of John Lennon, whom he once called a father figure. In a 1993 interview, Cobain said, "I like the Beatles, but I hate Paul McCartney." Lennon was obviously disturbed. I could relate to that. He even recorded a haunting lo-fi version of "And I Love Her," turning sweetness into sorrow.
She gives me everything, will never die, and I love her.
Cobain admired the emotional clarity of Beatles' melodies, simple, direct, and unforgettable. Tracks like About a Girl and Come As You Are may be grunge on the surface, but underneath, they carry the DNA of Beatles-style pop songwriting. Both Lennon and Cobain laid themselves bare, confronting pain, alienation, and hypocrisy with brutal honesty. Nirvana never imitated the Beatles, but they inherited their sincerity, raw, imperfect, and painfully human.
Take advantage while you hear me out to try. Slip inside the eye of your mind, does it know you might find?
If it wasn't for the Beatles, Oasis wouldn't exist, Noel Gallagher once declared. From melodies to chord progressions, Oasis soaked in Beatles' DNA and proudly wore it loud.
Backbeat, the word is on the street that the fire in your heart is out.
Don't look back in anger, echoes imagine. All around the world, mirrors, Hey Jude's epic, Na 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 finish. Liam Gallagher styled himself after Lennon, the sneer, the shades, the swagger. They recorded at Abbey Road and packed album art with Beatles references, from Definitely Maybe's living room photo inspired by a Beatles shoot, to the submerged rolls with Abbey Road matching plates. Oasis didn't just love the Beatles, they became their loudest echo. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones, often framed as rivals, but, in truth, the Stones owed much to the Fab Four. When the Beatles exploded in '63, they kicked open the doors for British rock. The Stones followed closely behind, but it was the Beatles who helped them get there, even giving them one of their first hits, I Wanna Be Your Man.
I wanna be your lover, baby. I wanna be your man.
The Beatles' early fame paved the way for British bands in America. Without that wave, the Stones might not have had a path in. But where the Beatles were polished and pop-friendly, the Stones leaned into blues, grit, and rebellion. Their experimentation in the late '60s, Satanic Majesties, Paint It Black, Ruby Tuesday, echoed the Beatles' push into psychedelia and new studio sounds.
I see a line of cars and they're all painted black. Goodbye, Ruby Tuesday. Who could hang?
The Stones became the Beatles' darker reflection, less harmony, more swagger. But they walked through a door the Beatles built.
Yesterday don't matter if it's gone.
Thanks for joining us on this musical deep dive here on Tales from the Gramophone. If you felt the nostalgia, heard something new, or found a fresh appreciation for these artists, give us a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more nostalgia.